Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, why is that?
Oh, can we turn the sound off on this TV?
Hold on.
Oh, you have to mute your.
Okay, now
mute your
try.
sound.
Yeah, now try.
Test 1, 2.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? If you're able to do a thumbs up, please do a thumbs up. If this has the option for thumbs up. I usually use Microsoft Teams at work.
It does.
What do you want me to do? I'm gonna put this on my computer. It's okay.
Kevin and Sue?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you.
I can hear you.
Excellent. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Campbell Lark, formerly Nathan Campbell, formerly Sean Campbell. My legal paperwork went through smoothly. So, okay. So I've been asked to give this presentation. It's part of a series of history presentations. Next week, I'll be giving a different one, and I will talk about that more at the end of this presentation. Now, this one came about because I recently finished my master's degree in history, and I wrote my thesis on the 1492 expulsion of Sephardic Jews from Spain into the Ottoman Empire. Excuse me?
Can you turn your screen on and your camera on? Well, you don't want to do that?
Here, I've got the camera on him.
Oh, but it's not showing up.
Keep going, Nathan. I think that was just Roberta that hadn't muted.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, so I did my thesis on the 1492 expulsion of Sephardic Jews from Spain and into the Ottoman Empire. I learned a lot in the 7 months of research, so I just wanted to share that. So I will go through this presentation. Now, a couple people have tested this presentation and said it was way too specific, so I tried to make it a little more general, but I will take critique at the end, along with questions. So I will go ahead and get started. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be an examination of what happened in 1492 with Sephardic Jews being expelled from Spain and how they made their way into the Ottoman Empire and what their experience was like. I will ask if everyone would please hold their questions until the end of the presentation, just so I don't mentally lose track. So, to gain a larger understanding of the 1492 expulsion of Jews, specifically 1492 from Spain and 1497 for Portugal. So, some things to keep in mind are, what was the connection between Sephardic Jews and the Ottoman Empire before and after 1492? We will have a heavier focus on the after part of that. Also, what was life like for Sephardic Jews? Did I repeat that? Okay, this went through a lot of different edits. So the analysis for this period is 1492 to 1592. Now, if a lot of you are interested, I can absolutely do deeper dives into before and after, but this is mainly pointing out things I learned through my 7 months of research. So the 1492 expulsion came about from the Alhambra decree. It was the Edict of Expulsion of the Jews in Spain, written in March 1492 from King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella when they put together the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. They wanted to expel all Jews from their lands. Now, the options given were convert to Catholicism or leave Spain. They were given just 4 months to do that. This decree ended almost 1,000 years of Sephardic Jews living under Muslim rule after the expulsion from the destruction of the Second Temple. So, what made the immigration difficult was that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella specifically stated that Jews were not allowed to export gold, silver, or any money. It limited their options for trying to get out of Spain. It made their travel a bigger burden. They were having to sell their houses for pennies, whatever the equivalent was back then. A lot of authors have talked about the dangers that would happen. Captains would take Jews, take their money, and then abandon ship. People would be killed. It was a very, very dangerous time for getting out of Spain. Now, at the time, there was an option for Jews to go into Portugal. The problem was that only 5 years later, that king would expel Jews, and he was even crueler to Jews than some of the royalty in Spain. So even for the Jews that went to Portugal, they still had to leave to other places afterward. So I keep saying the Iberian Peninsula. I do mean Spain and Portugal. But the work I did on my thesis mainly was Spain. So what propelled me into this research was that Sultan Bayezid II of the Ottoman Empire, he welcomed everybody. He said, "Everybody come here. Um, we're happy to have you. I'll take anybody I can." There's even some reports that he sent a fleet of ships. Now, I have not corroborated that. That's actually part of my independent research right now to find out what was the fleet of ships, how many ships were there, how many people were saved. But the majority of Jews, they took whatever boats they could. They tried to go to North Africa. They went from country to country. But with the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire controlling a lot of North Africa, it was dangerous for them to port there and go deeper into the country. It was also more dangerous on the European front, so it was very treacherous trying to get from Spain to the Ottoman Empire, even if he did welcome people. So there have been a lot of inconsistencies with how many Jews were expelled from Spain. That was a big part of my research because the census data doesn't match. It was anywhere between 50,000 Jews to 250,000 Jews were expelled. So a lot of my research was trying to figure out how we can narrow those numbers based on different records that were kept in Spain and the Ottoman Empire, and what are other factors. And like I said, it goes much, much deeper into that, and I'd be happy to have those conversations later. But for the purposes of now, I just want to keep in mind questions such as how many Jews fled Spain is countered with the problem that many Spanish histories of the time are quick to list that Jews left, but not exactly how many, or what happened to them. So the Ottoman Empire would benefit from all of the skilled Jewish merchants, craftsmen, artisans, and it was great for the Ottoman Empire because they realized that the Sephardic Jews were not going to try to take over the Ottoman Empire. There was no worry about a potential war or power struggle. One fun fact, Sephardic Jews brought the printing press to the Ottoman Empire in 1493, which is something I will get a few more details as we get further into this presentation. To further understand the administrative policies, because every sultan had a little bit of a different idea of how this should be facilitated, Mehmet II, he was the one that conquered Constantinople and turned it into Istanbul. He reigned from 1451 to 1481. His son, Bayezid II, who was the sultan who welcomed the Jews to the Ottoman Empire in 1492, ruled into 1512, followed by Selim I, followed by what some argue was the greatest sultan of the Ottoman Empire, which was Suleiman the Magnificent, or Suleiman I, ruled from 1520 to 1566. Now, Bayezid II was more conservative. He didn't like a lot of congregations being built from scratch, but he didn't mind ones being retrofitted, which is something I get into a little further in the presentation. But let's see. Bayezid II, he had a quote that I realized I didn't put into this presentation. He said about King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, "You call Ferdinand a wise king, he who impoverishes his country and enriches our own. He not only welcomed Sephardic exiles, but ordered his provincial governors to assist any wanderers by opening their borders," which is something that was very unheard of at the time. So, for the Jews that were already in the Ottoman Empire, the Romano or Greek-speaking Jews, they had a very different. Okay. They had a very different feeling about the Ottomans. They did not like the Ottoman Empire because Mehmet II, who conquered Constantinople, he did notice that anywhere he would force Jews to emigrate, they would make the cities more prosperous. So he saw them as an economic tool. So while Bayezid II was welcoming Jews in to help the economy, Mehmet II was forcing them to move from place to place strategically. So you see a lot of differing opinions on the Ottoman Empire depending on whether you're a Romanite Jew or a Sephardic Jew. The new economic centers of the Ottoman Empire were Istanbul and Salonika, which is now known as Thessaloniki in Greece. So, Rabbi Elijah Kapsili, or I hope I pronounced that right, writer of the Seder Eliyahu Zuta, mentioned details about Bayezid's actions, and many historians have written about Bayezid II's welcome, and I do have more quotes from Rabbi Kapsili. After the establishment in 1492, Sephardic Jews began to be in a better state than some of the Romanite Jews were in the Ottoman Empire. The Ladino, which was spoken, it was a mixture of Spanish and Hebrew, that actually began to overwhelm the cities where other types of Hebrew and language were spoken. So the Sephardic Jews actually find themselves kind of being the majority in some of those cities. So, going back to the printing press, the first printing press in the Ottoman Empire was brought by Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. Most of these printed materials were in Hebrew from Istanbul and Salonika. I switch between Salonika and Thessaloniki depending on the time. So there was a wave of rabbinic responsa that flooded the presses. It showed how the ingenuity of a lot of the first generation rabbis. There actually was no Muslim or Arabic printing press until the early 18th century.
Wow.
So, speaking more on the Jewish prosperity and culture, within the communities, the congregations began to organize around the geographic region of the members. So you start seeing a lot of the names of the congregations pull from cities and locations in Spain because a lot of them still had the ties to Spain. They had been there for 1,000 years. The religious, legal, educational services, a lot of the customs were all brought over from Spain and would start to blend into the Ottoman society. Now, at the time, the Ottoman rulers, they kind of had a policy of as long as you pay us taxes, do whatever you want, have your own society. So there wasn't a lot of influence by the Ottoman officials. Now, speaking of language, I know we'll get into Ladino a little bit later, but as part of my research and something that I'm trying to look deeper into, the Ladino that was spoken, the mixture of medieval Spanish with Hebrew that came over to the Ottoman Empire, that dialect, medieval Spanish, stuck around until the 1940s. So almost 500 years of an unchanged language. That's important because when they left Spain, Spain changed to Renaissance Spanish. So that language kept evolving, but it was separate from this disconnected set of Jews that were in the Ottoman Empire. So they still spoke medieval Spanish mixed with Hebrew. They started to mix with a little bit of Turkish. So you started to get some argue Judismo is not the right term, but a lot of books agree that that is what's called the blend of Turkish, Hebrew, and Spanish. But there's always going to be a lot of people who disagree on that. But that was based on a lot of my research, which I find very interesting. So, further influences. Many Sephardic refugees were drawn to Safed, which was taken over by the Ottoman Empire quickly after, I think it was a generation after the Sephardic Jews got over. So there was a renaissance of Kabbalistic writing at the time, which would be mainly in Safed, not the other Ottoman cities. As far as economic growth, the Sephardic Jews brought valuable skills. They had a thriving textile industry in Safed, making it an international hub for fabric production, and it helped boost the economy of the Ottoman Empire. So, as far as intellectual and religious leadership, there was an influence of Sephardic scholars and rabbis. Like I said, the Code of Jewish Law helped transform Safed into a hub of Jewish legal and spiritual authority. So, like I was talking about earlier, as far as with congregations, now, in a lot of large cities, they did retain their names and customs, such as Garush Sepharad, Spanish exile. That was the name of one of the big congregations.
Wow.
Typical sizes of congregations range from several dozen to almost 300 members. Now, over time, regional differences, like I said, if you are a Romanite Jew versus Sephardic versus Ashkenazi, Sephardics definitely were the majority in a lot of these areas, so it influenced a lot of the congregations. Now, as people switch congregations, as different generations of immigrants started to come about, there were development of new social and commercial ties. So when I was trying to narrow down the population count, I had to take into account what were the congregation names. Did that link to where they came from? If they came from that place in Spain, could I track down waves of immigration to specific places in the Ottoman Empire. Now, location. Rabbi Elijah Kapsili believed that the open door policy by the Ottoman Sultan was part of a divine strategy to bring the Jews nearer to the land of Israel in preparation for their redemption. In his Seder Eliyahu, chapter 81, stated, "And our righteous Messiah will come, because ever since the expulsion from Spain, God has started to gather the exiled from Israel and Judea in the lands of the dispersion. He is assembling them from all four corners of the earth." So that also were some trains of thought that were going on at this time. So, Ladino. Still spoken by Sephardic Jews in the Balkans, Greece, Turkey, and Israel, Ladino preserves words and grammatical usages that have been lost in modern Spanish, written in Hebrew characters like Yiddish, but takes heavily influence from Spanish. Influences of Ottoman culture. So, as I said before, Turkish would blend into Hebrew and Spanish, further blending into Ladino. Now, a lot of people have been quick to say you can't call that a language because it's colloquial. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use, but it was a regional blend of some of these that don't follow specific rules of a language. So while they would speak Hebrew, Spanish, and Turkish, a lot of people argue you couldn't call that a language per se, but it's typically seen as Ladino. Now, despite some of the more conservative sultans, Jews in the Ottoman Empire were granted autonomy through the millet system. According to the Quran, Christians and Jews were people of the Bible known as dhimmi, who were not forced to convert to Islam but allowed to live under Muslim arrangement with certain prohibitions as long as they paid the taxes. So a lot of the population counts I was trying to find were through tax documents. But the problem is, when you go into that, it's how do you define a household? Because a lot of places, the way they determined a household was a communal fireplace. So how do you determine a population from a fireplace? So in certain documents, it was how many people are paying the taxes here, how many people are counted under one roof. So, some questions for discussion. What were some of the differences between the Romanov and Sephardic Jewish experiences in the Ottoman Empire? Does anyone have any ideas on that? Why was it important for the Ottoman leadership to accept Jews in a time when many countries were desperately trying to expel them? And what happened to Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire as a result of the mass immigration? Now, I say questions for discussion, but I would very much like to hear what everyone thinks about this. And this is where I'll pause. I have a few more slides, not many, but this is where I will open the floor up for if anyone wants to have some discussions about this.
If you stop sharing, then we'll be able to see the whole. Is it okay to stop sharing and then come back? Or do you think that'll be a problem?
Well, maybe I'll just run out the rest of this PowerPoint and then we can go back to this questions for discussion.
Okay.
So for future classes and contact information, if you have suggestions on how I can improve this, because I very much want to hear about each one of your experiences. I'm very new to this. I just got my master's degree. I spent almost a year researching this. I realize a lot of people have differing opinions depending on who wrote these books. I would very much like to know, did I get anything wrong? Is there anything I should expand upon? If anyone's interested, I can make a part 2, a part 3. I can go into what preceded this, what succeeded this, and what the effects would be. So, as I said, I recently went through a name change. I am now Nathan Lark. I have put my email here, nathan.lark2414@gmail.com. So if any of you would like to talk to me after this, I would very much like to hear from you. This is going to be the case with next week's presentation. Next week, so as I talked about the 1492 expulsion, a lot of Jews went westward. So a lot of them went to South America. My presentation is what was the different experiences between Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, because those were very different experiences. So I dive into that a little bit. And my bibliography, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. So, and that's not even everything.
Yeah.
I shortened it for that, but I wanted everyone to know that everything I talked about in this presentation, I pulled exactly from these sources. So, thank you all for your time, and now we can open up the floor.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
What's a Romanite Jew?
So they're ones that were primarily Greek speaking, and they came over from the destruction of the Second Temple straight into the area that would become the Ottoman Empire. So they were the ones that had been there since then. So that's why there was a lot of bitter feelings between Jews that immigrated to the area versus the ones that had immigrated much, much earlier. Also, with the Ottoman policies of moving them from place to place, they incentivized moving, but the incentive was you can take this incentive or you will be pushed. So it was very, a lot of feelings, which is, I know that's a lot more information than the one question you asked.
What were the professions of Jews in the Ottoman Empire?
You're muted. You're muted.
Apologies. A lot of traders, artisans, craftsmen. The traders were in a great position to speak the different languages. But there were more waves of immigration because I spoke about the immigration from 1492, but it wasn't one. It was decades of immigration, which is one of the problems that I ran into when I was doing my research. A lot of people said they immigrated. Here's what they did. There are stories in how this immigration happened that are barely scratched upon the surface. The immigration from country to country, the fleets of pirate ships that brought people over, the waves of the Ottoman fleet, the battles, establishing from Spain into Portugal, and then having to run from Portugal to the Ottoman Empire. I mean, most of the research is just like there's Spain and there's the Ottoman Empire, and there's just hardly anything in between. And I know a lot of the records were difficult at the time, and there was a lot of subcontracting out. For example, the Ottoman Sultan told his Admiral Rice to do it. He didn't do it. He subcontracted out to his nephew, and unfortunately, his nephew was a cartographer, and that's all everybody wants to talk about. So you lose a lot of that experience in the specifics on their profession. So trading was the big thing based on their experiences and based on their communication, facilitating trading within the empire. But I actually have the book with me. I think I can jump to that to give you a more specific answer. Let's see. I knew I was not going to be able to remember everything, but Professor Jane Gerber, she wrote the Jews of Spain, History of the Sephardic Experience. She spent 30 years writing this book, and it is one of the most detailed books about this subject that I ran into. And I know she would have answered that in here. Or I can just put a pin in that and get back to you.
Yeah.
I think I'll do that.
I
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Can you guys hear me?
Now,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just have like so many questions, Nathan. So and before I launch into my questions, I want to just mention that Lila expressed the hope that she'd be able to post your PowerPoint along with the recording on our YouTube channel. So
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Oh, you mean the presentation I'm speaking of now or the PowerPoint that I used to show the screen?
They should all be the same.
Either or works for me.
Okay. So, and there may not be any information about this, but I bet it would be fascinating to have a sense of like the conversation among the leadership in the Ottoman Empire about, how did they even find out that the expulsion was happening? I mean, at this time, communication was, so slow, right? So how did they find out, what was the conversation about the decision around inviting this huge number, potentially huge number of refugees to come into their empire. Did they know that the Sephardic Jews had a printing press? Like, that's fascinating to me. That was a brand new technology and a powerful one. Did they have any awareness that was that part of their motivation? Did they want to bring the printing press to their empire? And how many people even knew that there was such a thing as the printing press at that point? So anyway, those are all. There might not be any answers to those questions, but and how did the Sephardic Jews find out that the Sultan had decided to open up, immigration for them? Like, how did that, when and how did that information reach the Sephardic populations? Now I know that the expulsion was happening and over a much longer period of time, but it seems like maybe that decision came towards the end of I don't know if that's true or not. So yeah, sorry, it's a lot of questions at one time.
So, to answer this question, I will have to start with it's been a lot of my frustration with the gaps in this information. I mean, it took me 7 months of research to write the 120-page paper that I shrunk down to be this presentation. Now, to answer some of your questions, I am paraphrasing. These are my words. They might not necessarily reflect what people were intending. It seems to me that the Ottoman Empire saw Jews as an equation. If you bring these to your empire gets better. So they were fighting many wars because most of the Ottoman histories, you're only written about if you conquer something or you're about to conquer something. So Bayezid II was actually not very well written about because he wanted to boost the economy and the prosperity of the Ottoman Empire. So while other sultans, I'm getting to a point, I promise. While other sultans were, I'm conquering this city, I'm conquering that city, Bayezid II was a book nerd. He's like, I'm boosting my libraries, I'm boosting my hospital. There is a hospital he built in the 1400s that stands to this day in Istanbul. He was on the forefront of medical technology that had not been seen at a time where people were being brutalized for being mentally ill. He was building rooms built to use musical acoustics to help people feel better, heal better. Like I said, the hospital still stands to this day. His library, he was a book nerd. He read every single book anyone gave him. He stamped it with his seal once he read it. Big library. He wanted to boost the libraries, the hospitals. He brought in professions. He wanted Jewish doctors. He wanted Jewish physicians. He wanted anything that was going to help the internal Ottoman Empire. And he did do a little bit of conquering, but it was not on the scale that his dad did, his son did, his grandson. So when he saw Jews, because he grew up with his dad, and his dad said Jews plus our economy equals a positive. So when the conversations were going on, I don't think it was based on what I've read, because there's not a lot of history of what he actually said about Jews. The only thing he said about Jews was that, I don't want any new temples being built. You can retrofit as many as you want. He was a bit conservative. Now, the conversation, the Muslims were being expelled from Spain as well. So, and there were Muslim nations across Africa because, there weren't the countries that exist today. There were mainly tribal leaders. So I imagine, based on my research, I don't know because they never exactly said, but maybe the line of communication got back that Muslims are being expelled and also Jews. And they're like, okay, well, we'll take anybody. But like I said, trying to trace the path from Spain to the Ottoman Empire is virtually non-existent. I mean, what I'm trying, because that's part of my research now. I'm trying to say what were the biggest ships at the time. If they sent a fleet, how many people fit on a ship? How far could you get on the food and water from Spain to the Ottoman Empire? Could that even be one trip? So there's so many questions out there. So when you're talking about what did they think about the Jews, how did they do it? How did they get them over there? I think there was one more question you had that I'm not
About the
answering.
printing press.
Printing press. As far as I understand, they didn't know or care that the Jews had a printing press. They're like, you do your thing over there, we have our thing, pay us taxes. It didn't seem like they even cared that they had a printing press because a printing press for the Muslims didn't even happen until 200 years later. They never asked for it. They never asked why there were more books being printed in Hebrew. They didn't care. It really seems like there was this level of apathy of, you're not going to conquer us, you're paying us taxes, do whatever you want over there.
Huh.
That there really seemed to be this apathy in all the books that I've read about that. Now, that may be very different. Like I said, I mainly focused on 1492 to 1592. That might have been very different 1 year after 1592, but for the purposes of my study, I had to narrow it down to about a 100-year period.
Great.
So I have a question,
Yes.
if I can hear it. This sounds, when you describe they kicked out the Muslims and they kicked out the Jews, it sounds like the 15th century version of Christian nationalism. And I had read a quote by Maimonides talking about how badly the people treated Jews, even though that was known as the golden age of Jewry, et cetera, et cetera. He had a quote that they persecute us all the time. Just wondered, was this something that it was not just the king and queen, but there was a lot of anti-foreigner, non-Christian sentiment in Spain at the time?
From what I read, there was, if we're talking about a fire, a lot of the friars were throwing fuel onto that fire. A lot of the friars were publicly trying to sway opinions. I haven't done a lot of research into that, but from the little bit of information I gathered, that is what I read about. And a funny quote from Maimonides that I read that I kind of laughed at was, we always hear about what he wrote as far as like religious writings and everything, but I remember reading a quote, "I'm so tired. I work all day in the hospitals and I barely have any sleep. I am so tired." And I just thought that was very relatable.
Did you come across that quote I was talking about, where he talks about the oppression from the people and how tough they made their life?
Yes.
Mm.
But I know that was I think that was what, 200 years prior to the expulsion, if I'm
Let's see. Yeah.
I think so. I put a tab in here for him.
Like 1100s. He lived during the
Yep, 1130. There were a series of important Jewish, Spanish philosophers. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that was before Spain became Christianized.
Yes. There was a particular battle. I think it was the Battle of Tours. That was where the turning point of the Muslim armies hit the point where it started to go backwards. And then after the Battle of Tours, it started to Christianize more and more and more until the fall of Granada, and then they ruled that area. And then Aragon and Castile came together to become Spain. So a lot of historians determine that the Battle of Tours, if it had flipped, it would have changed the course of human history.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. Other questions out there in Zoom land? I don't know if anyone, I know there's a lot of rich information this evening.
When did the Jews first come to Spain?
Excellent question. And I have my book. I cannot remember the exact year, but I believe it is in the beginning of this. I know, because in my head it was almost 1,000 years.
And where did they come from?
Most came from Israel, Judea at the time, from the destruction of the temple. A lot of them followed the roads that were established because it wasn't until later that a lot of those roads would be absolutely destroyed from lack of funding, wars. So a lot of the routes that Jews used to get to Spain didn't exist even 100 years after they made that initial journey. So it makes thinking about that very difficult. Let's see. Okay, it was about 800 years, so about 732, I believe. So there was a couple hundred years between just the immigrating over to there. But I don't have as much information about that one in particular.
What you said about the it's just interesting parallels. What you said about the Romanio Jews in the Ottoman Empire and the the Spanish Jews coming in, the dynamics seem a little bit different, but it's also sounds not that different from the German Jews who were in America already, and then the Eastern European Jews came here, and there was a lot of tension between them. Now, in that case, the tension had to do with how Americanized the German Jews were and the Eastern European Jews were not. Do you have any sense if that was a dynamic between the Romano Jews and the Sephardic Jews? I mean, like with the Romano Jews had been in that, they've been there for hundreds of years, right? And here comes this new group of Jews. Did they? But the group of Jews that were coming in from Spain were all pretty sophisticated. It wasn't like the Eastern European Jews who were, compared to the Germans, they lived much more simple kinds of lives. They didn't have, they didn't have university backgrounds or professional training or what have you. Anyway, that was just an interesting,
Yeah, it was a very big culture clash, and that actually was one of the things that kind of threw a wrench in the engine of my research, because when you're trying to track down the immigration patterns, a lot of people are quick to say, "Oh, the expulsion happened and a lot of Jews came to the Ottoman Empire," but it was not until I started digging into this research where they said, "Oh, well, there also was a mass expulsion of Jews within the Ottoman Empire that happened at the same time." So when you're tracking numbers, they all kind of fly out. So then another leg of my research became tracking by language. Can I use language to try to track down like which of these population numbers are Romanov Jews versus Ashkenazi versus Sephardic? So a lot of my research was proposals of how we can do more research. I didn't have as many concrete answers. What I tried to do was, okay, historians don't agree on how many Jews equal a Jewish household. At the time, in medieval times, like what is the average number of Jews that would be in one household? Historians go from 3 to almost 8, and that can completely throw your population count from 50,000 to 500,000. Also, the Shurgun, the forced deportation of Jews from different areas of the Ottoman Empire to economic centers such as Edirne, Constantinople to Istanbul, Safed. That also threw things off. So that's when I tried to track down population numbers by congregation, language. So a lot of the research I did was, can we all as historians come together to pool our information and resources so we can come to an accurate number? Like, can we agree that an average number would be 4? Can we track down by this type of congregation, or how many people are typically in a congregation at that time? So it was very, very difficult and is getting more difficult as I continue to do this research and find that there's more holes. Yes, Kevin.
Were there Ashkenazi Jews in 1500?
I believe so, not as many. Mainly the research I was looking into was Sephardic and Romanot at the time.
Nathan, can you say why the ruler that seemed so far ahead of his time, where was his influences that he was so advanced in his thinking about mental health? And
from what I gather, he was just one of the most well-read rulers at the time. I mean, he read as much as he can get his hands on. He also, like I said, didn't really want to conquer as much. He wanted to help his own people. So I imagine, based on what I read, that he did a lot of I want to say networking, but I don't know if that's the right word. But like I said, any more is just speculation. There is not much written on him. They write on his courts a little bit. I was able to get a list of his libraries, all the books that were supposedly in his libraries with that seal. Leora, my wife, she was Sophia and turned to Leora. That's actually my necklace. This is the equivalent of a penny from the reign of Bayezid II. And she got it for me, and I was like, why isn't this in a museum? And she's like, no one cares. But to me, I'm like, this person right here saved up to almost, if numbers are to be believed, saved up to almost 250,000 Jews. And this is the type of person that I wanted to research about. Like at a time where Jews are being expelled from every country, who is this person that's like, come, everybody come in here, we'll get you a job, we'll set you up, you can have your own language. Just it baffled me, and it really fueled my research. which I know exactly didn't 100% answer
No,
your
no,
question,
I
but
was just fascinated
there's
by
just so many gaps in the information that
Yeah.
I really want to dedicate more research to answering all these questions.
So the books that he was reading were like pre-printing press books. They were like handwritten, hand-bound. Is that right?
Yeah, that was actually how you curried favor with him. If you wanted to get in his good graces, you bought him a book. That's what he wanted for everything.
I
And
love
people
that.
presented him a book, and he was insistent that he read them.
Wow. Wow. That is very interesting.
I was curious about this forced migration to the big cities from the smaller town. What was that? How did that happen? What was the genesis of that?
So that was a policy started by his father, Mehmet II. He noticed that a lot of the good economy was going on because there were Jewish merchants and craftsmen. So he came up with the idea that if I bring Jews to the capital cities of the empire, that should boost the economy. So he emptied so many of the smaller towns, smaller villages, and pushed them in there. So that might have been what got the gears turning in his son Bayezid's mind that if there is this expulsion happening in Spain and there are Jews as well as Muslims, like why don't I continue what my father started? And because they were coming over and he could protect them in ways that other people couldn't, there was no need for force. I'm not sure what would have happened if he had decided that he was going to force people out of another country. Because, like I said, at the time, based on my research, there is not a ship that could have gotten from Spain to the Ottoman Empire in one go. I know this gets a little bit into the details, but with the if you had the biggest water supply you could fit on a ship at the time, and you had the biggest ship in the fleet, you still could not get more than halfway before you ran out of water, ran out of food. Then you run the risk of it's dangerous to go to different ports because you don't know if they're going to be friendly to you or not. So he took a big risk bringing over Jews. So that also was, he's not just saying you can come here if you want, he actively helped promote bringing people over.
Hmm.
So, like I said, that also didn't 100% answer your question, but I'm just going off of the information that I have.
And the internal movement, forced movement, those were Romanov Jews, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting.
So what else was going on in Turkey at the time in terms of their conquests of other countries?
So they were mainly in battle with the Venetians at the time. During the time after the 1492 expulsion, that's when they got Safed. They added that to the Ottoman Empire. So they were expanding a little bit, but not to the extent that, because the biggest the Ottoman Empire got was under Suleiman the Magnificent, who was said to be the greatest sultan of them all. Many historians attribute the Ottoman Empire going downhill ever since Suleiman died, for many different reasons, which is something completely different that I can get into. But at the time, they were mainly just trying to hold their ground against the Venetians. As far as I understand, the few battles that Bayezid II was against them.
Okay. Very interesting.
Right.
Does anyone else have any questions or statements?
I'm just, well, I'll just say another thing that sounded interesting to me. Like you talked about how the Jewish blending of the languages preserved an older form of those languages, like of Spanish, for example. And it did something similar happen to like the people who speak French in Canada or in Montreal, in New Orleans or something? Like I feel like maybe the form of French, I don't know this, I'm just speculating. Maybe someone on the Zoom knows this, but the form of French
Do you want me to
that
take
is
it?
spoken in those parts of North America is a much older, I think, form of French, or it's preserved at a certain point, whereas in France proper, the language evolved, much, further beyond that. So I just think that's a fascinating. It looks like Kevin has a comment.
Yes, Kevin.
If he really had a lot of ships, he could have set up a procedure where, in a sense, there were ships that just went out far enough to refill the ships that were coming from afar. So he could have avoided going to ports. It would take a lot of logistics, but people were smart back then too. And if he's got a lot of ships and a lot of control, it's like refueling planes
Yeah.
go a certain distance. So that would be another possibility for him to be able to bring Jews over.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's an interesting point, because I was trying to track down the ports like along the coast, but even that's difficult because there's not a lot of records of that. But it didn't occur to me that they could fill halfway. I mean, I'm in the Air Force. I mean, we did that, so that's actually a really good point, because we had to strap the fuel bladders into the planes to be able to refill in the air. So yeah, I could try researching that. Thank you. Um, Rabbi Steve, to answer your question, it's about the languages. So I'm sorry. Did I answer your full question, Kevin, or you were just okay? Um, as far as the preservation of language, what made that unique is that the Ottomans really did not care. They were like, you don't have to assimilate, you don't have to speak our language, as long as you speak the language of money. Like that's all we need to know. Um, and a lot of countries at the time were like, you will speak our language. Now, if you want to get a little more technical, as far as Spanish to Hebrew to Turkish, there was a French school. I think it was in the 1800s. They came to the area where Sephardic Jews were, and they wanted to say, "Oh, you were going to speak French now," but they gave up. I think it was an attempt to make French more relevant in different areas, but they gave up. So you had people who spoke a little bit of French, and that kind of threw the language off a little bit, because that was a half-cooked attempt to force Sephardic Jews to speak French. So that was also something that happened. But the preservation of medieval Spanish was really because the Ottomans gave them free rein to do that. Now, with other areas, you have to wonder, like, if the government's going to force them to speak a different language, or if it's people in one community speaking that particular dialect. Because, like I said, even 100 years later, they started speaking Renaissance Spanish. So that was very different. And also, when you're looking into a lot of the letters at this time, a lot of the letters that were talking about what happened to the Sephardic Jews were written in Catalan. So that was also something where I'm like, I'm learning Spanish right now. I'm like, I can't read this. It's in Catalan. So that was also something at the time, because that area was much bigger at the time in 1492. So they were listing in the letters that were written in Catalan, were talking about what ships were coming, what Jews were getting on what ships, like, are they Italian ships, are they French ships, what's happening to them. So that opens up more of how many of those letters have been translated into English, because a lot of them were still written in Catalan. So that kind of makes me wonder, because I really want to explore this as a PhD, but I need to know two languages. So I'm definitely doing Spanish, but what second language I want to learn depends, because would Portuguese work? Because there's a little bit written about Spanish Jews. There's even less written about Portuguese Jews in the grand scheme of the Jews that went from the Iberian Peninsula to the Ottoman Empire.
I have a Portuguese. I know you just said there's little written about the Portuguese Jews. Do you know what happened? 5 years is a relatively short period of time to like welcome in. I don't know if they were welcomed or tolerated in Portugal when they were being kicked out, but was there a change in leadership in Portugal that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
First of all, the Portuguese king was very cruel to the Jews, mainly wanted their money. So once they came in, it said, we're only going to accept some Jews, put them under terrible conditions, took away their children. I mean, some of the stories that came from that king, he was a monster. But he did die, and his successor took over, who was happy to have the Jews, but there was pressure from Spain because they wanted him to marry the Spanish princess at the time. So once he married her, even though he tolerated Jews, I'm in a marriage, we have to kick Jews out again. So it was a change twice. So it was one king for the money, one king for that. Yes, Kevin.
A lot of Portuguese Jews went to the Netherlands because they settled there. We've read books about that. Didn't any of the Spanish Jews go to the Netherlands?
I'm honestly not sure about that. I only I did a little bit of research about where they all went to, but I mainly focused on the Ottoman Empire, which is also interesting because like my heritage is half Norwegian, half Scottish, and I actually there's a branch of Sephardic Jews that went from Spain straight to Norway, which is an entirely different
Whoa.
situation of what happened there because there I think if you were an Ashkenazi Jew, you were hated, but if you were Sephardic, you were allowed. Like it was a weird dynamic in Norway. So that's a story for another time. If anyone's interested, I can turn that into a presentation in and of itself.
What about Morocco? What was going on there?
Okay, so there, I know a little bit about it. I know there were certain areas of that where some Jews were accepted, some were like absolutely not. So some of the ports were friendly, but they wouldn't let you inward. Now I know I can't remember if it's the Kingdom of Fez or Morocco. Maybe Fez is in Morocco. I don't know. I did very, very minimal research on it, but honestly, I probably shouldn't say any more on that. I feel like the more I talk, the more I'm digging myself a hole. So,
Do you have a map of all of this?
so there are some maps online that show a little bit of this trajectory, but they don't tend to come from the most credible sources. So I have been very hesitant to include it in my presentations because I can't. The problem is a lot of the information about the fleet of ships that came over, they all come from sites that don't list their sources. They're not edu, they're not .gov, and like the books I'm reading, like this one, I mean, they include some basic information and they include pictures and letters, but they don't really include the maps. Like I would love to spend some time making a map like this or taking some of those old maps and then corroborating them. That's the lack of information. Like the more I dug, the more questions I had because a lot of the information about the Jewish experiences came from people. One was Dershwam, I think he was a German traveler, but he was heavily biased. So even though he's a primary source for my paper, he can't be fully trusted. And a lot of the people who wrote about the Jewish experiences were there was one historian who was tilting the information to curry favor with Bayezid II. So even doing all the research, the pages of bibliography that I showed, it's hard to know what exactly to trust going and presenting this information.
Wow.
Yes, Nancy.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I had an experience and it may be relevant to your interests. I was at the Cleveland Clinic taking my dad to an appointment one day some years ago. And they have like groupings of seats for people who are waiting, like families, and the people at the next grouping were speaking a language I couldn't recognize. So I turned around and asked them what it was. And it was Turkish.
Okay.
And one of the men in the group came over to talk, and he introduced himself as the head of the Istanbul Jewish community.
Huh.
And he was in town because his brother needed medical care. And we had a really interesting talk, and he was telling me some of the stories that are overlapping what you're talking about in greater depth. What you're saying is in greater depth. But along the way, he mentioned Rabbi Rosie Chaim. Do you know of her?
I do not.
Okay, she is a Cleveland rabbi, and she is from Istanbul, and they know each other.
Huh.
And I'm just thinking that that might be a very interesting person for you to meet.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, she was at Mishkan, what's now Mishkan, or she's not there anymore. She started her own group called, I looked it up, Celebrating Jewish Life. And I'm sure Rabbi Steve knows how to find her.
Yeah.
But that might be a cool, because he seemed very interested and knowledgeable about this whole subject. And I would imagine that that community would hold, experiences that would be interesting to you.
Thank you. I would definitely be in contact with them.
And if you need to reach me, no problem. Be happy to help.
Absolutely. I know it's been kind of a mix of emotions for this presentation, but if everyone would like to hear a fun history fact, I think everybody in this room has heard this before because I talked about it at one of our adult meetings, but Sultan Bayezid II, the one who did all this, he wanted to build a bridge. a magnificent bridge for the port of Istanbul. So he put out a commission. Anybody who wants to do it, we can have a discussion. Leonardo da Vinci threw his name into the hat. And there's a lot of speculation of why his bridge didn't get made. Some people they got his name wrong, so they thought he was this random Italian person who came up with a weird futuristic bridge. A lot of people think that it was a great bridge, but no one could build it. It's a simplistic bridge, but what it was two very, very large carved pieces of stone that
Wow.
when you drop, they're like this. When you drop them in over the inlet, they seal. And the more gravity pushes them down, the stronger the bridge gets. Now, the problem is they could not carve that, move that, or drop it from the air. So they had no way of building it. But his sketch work incorporated the earthquakes in that area. So no one had ever built this bridge until the 1980s when a group of scientists at MIT miniaturized the bridge on these massive trucks. And they shifted the trucks. It not only held, it withstand the pressure of these simulated earthquakes.
Mm.
If this bridge had been made, it would have revolutionized the world. Um, I just think it's really interesting because I didn't picture Leonardo da Vinci being alive at the same time as Bayezid II because they were in very different areas. But doing this research, I found that absolutely fascinating, and I wonder how history would have changed if this had actually gone through.
It's a great story. Well, any other questions for Nathan before we wrap up this evening's program? And I want to thank Nathan for just a really interesting, engaging presentation. It was fantastic, and whets our appetite for next Sunday when we're going to hear about three distinctive South American Jewish communal experiences. And I want to also, for those of us who are on site, I want to thank Maureen for opening
Thank you.
her home and hosting us here. And yeah, I can't wait for the part 2 of this. So we will be next Sunday, 7:30. I don't think we don't have an on-site option yet, do we, or do we?
Yeah, we do.
Oh,
I can never remember. It's a couple. Charles.
oh, Charles and Deborah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's going to be at Charles and Deborah's place in Cleveland Heights will be the on-site option. And but Zoom, as always, will be available. And
Please
Are you
RSVP
sure it's Charles and Deborah? Because Bruce and I had volunteered. We're fine if it's going to be at Charles and Deborah. No
oh,
problem.
oh,
Maybe you're right.
you know what? Alan says Alan says you think it was Bruce and Catherine.
I'll let
Okay.
everybody know.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay.
No
All
problem.
right. Well,
Let us know.
Okay.
we will confirm that soon in the next
This
24
evening.
hours this evening. Okay. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody, and thank you for being here. And look forward to next week. Okay.
Thank you.
That was really interesting.
Really
Thank you,
interesting.
Nathan.
Really
You
interesting.
can disconnect it.
Nathan, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.